everyone. Welcome to MahaBarsha show. Maha, do you want to say hi?
Hello, everyone.
We have an exciting, conversation ahead of us. We've got a very inspirational guest with us today, Bibigi. Welcome Bibigi to this episode of MahaBarsha show, and thank you for being a yes to having a conversation with us.
Of course, I'm really happy to be here.
As you know, MahaBarsha show, we invite awesome guest speakers, experts in their own field, with an intention to kind of understand what they've created, what they stand for, and what takeaways can you know, get from this conversation. So, BBG, without further ado, big fan of your work. You have created an awesome, sort of platform and your own sort of business in increasing visibility and encouraging women especially to work on their visibility. So thank you, and looking forward to this conversation. So yeah, Maha, did you want to add anything else? I know you introduced, BBG from your experience. So if you want to add something to this before we kick off our conversation.
So I met Bibiji a few years ago. I reached out to her on LinkedIn and I said, I really love what you put out there. When can we talk? And her immediate response was, sure, of course we can talk. And that started sort of my friendship, I'd say, with BBG now for a few years. Great admiration for just not asking women to put themselves out there, but putting herself out there with all of everything that BBG is. So I'm really, really delighted that you are our first guest. So much that you bring to the table. I wish I had met you 20 years ago, but I'm glad it's now than never. So welcome.
Thank you.
Great.
I was a very different person 20 years ago. And I think that's the whole path of visibility, right? The discovery along the way of what I wanted to put out in the world, and then just starting to put it out in the world. So when I think of the woman 20 years ago, I would have been 27. I was still trying to figure things out.
Isn't that interesting? And I think we'll dig a bit deeper into this. It's like we look at somebody and we're so impressed with them, which is due. But it's like, what has their journey been? Has it taken for them to get from 20 years ago to here, where we wish we'd known you 20 years ago, but you were a completely different person, different person, not saying good or bad, just different. And it's taken a journey. Tell us about, your work, BBG, and maybe how you started and what do you do?
Okay. I actually started, so I was a consultant for a really long time in org design and change management. I actually completely stopped in May of this year. And I started this work with women in 2017 after I came back from a maternity leave with my son. So I had my
Mm.
son, he's 8 years old now. And when I came back to work, I was always a consultant. So I wasn't an employee. I'm coming back to work. There's an expectation of results, right? I'm being paid for results. I'm not. And I was tired. My son was not sleeping. I was exhausted. I was finding everything really, really hard. And so I wondered if I was the only one who was going through that, the only woman who was going through that. And when I started to look around me, I certainly was not the only woman. So I sort of created or curated this Facebook groups of moms, but
Mm.
around our professional life. I had lots of other Facebook groups with mom, but this was specifically for our professional lives. And then I started to explore things that I was good at. I was good at helping interview. I was good at helping women think about what they wanted to do. And so I played around with that. And between that and today, and it's, there've been a lot of ups and downs, but it's been an exploration and a refinement of what I wanted and where I felt I was having impact. And I'm saying it and presenting it like this because I didn't come to this knowing what the end result is. And I'm absolutely certain, and we were talking about this offline, I'm absolutely certain that you speak to me 2 years down the road, women's visibility is still going to be core to what I'm doing,
Yeah.
but the format of it is probably going to have changed because I'm
Mhm.
going to continue testing things.
Yeah.
So I help women to get visible. I used to position it as a personal branding activity, and
Yeah.
I removed myself from that because personal branding is just one small piece of it. It's actually a result. Everybody thinks that you have to define a personal brand. It's the opposite. You have to do things and then
Yeah.
analyze what you've done and see what it says about you that you can
Mhm.
then solidify as a personal brand that you're proud to carry. But when
Yeah.
we do the contrary, we fall into this sort of imposter syndrome thing where we're like, okay, I've built this thing, now I
Mhm.
have to carry it, but it doesn't really feel good because I haven't done anything in that space.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
it's the testing and the playing, I think, that is critical about
Yeah.
visibility. And
Yeah.
then just saying, it's okay, I'll be fine. Like, I'll
Yeah.
literally be fine testing things out.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a very good point, right? Like personal branding, because as soon as I think of visibility, I think personal branding, like your brand. You know, Mahan, you were saying as well, right? Like in our field, in the IT and engineering, um, I think people tend to be. I'm not being any sort of racist or anything, but it's like people tend to be a little bit more, into themselves, like programming or solving problems, and the personal brand or even the visibility aspect is so far fetched because they're like, I'm too busy working on my own thing, right? So it's interesting, especially when it comes to women. We don't actually see very many women in technology. It's growing, but long way to go. But even in your space as well, this BBG, you mentioned this. Like how often do we see women visible out there?
Yeah.
So it looks like it's a. Mm,
So, Bibiji, question for you, right?
Yeah.
Knowing what you know now and what you're going to know in the next coming years, many, many years, right? Knowing what you know now, what are some of the things that you would say, oh, I wish I had known this, or I wish I had done this? You mentioned that
Yeah.
when we were just chatting about the show and the intent behind the show, and you said something like, "I wish I had known that sales was a career. I wish I had known marketing was a career." You said, "Oh, I would have loved to be a PR, run my own PR agency." Um, what are the things that you would have loved to have known early on in your formative years in your career that are competencies that we could, that we can talk a little bit more about with you and other guests that'll follow, right?
So, a big piece that I would have liked to know is how much I was responsible for the options that I was going to have later on and the opportunities that I would have later on.
Mm.
When I started out, I was sharing with you, when I finished high school, I went to law school. And I'm
mm,
not someone who can ever do law. I mean, it's such a long game, and there is so much information that you have to take that other people have created. I'm just not built for that. But I went to law. And so what ended up happening was my exploration during those first years was about finding something that I felt fit for me rather than having the information where I could take an informed decision. And it's only when I discovered women's studies and later business that I felt like, oh my God, these are my people.
Hmm.
Women's studies is the space I wish I had been in from day one. And then business became a complete obsession.
Yeah.
So, what I would love for people to know when they're starting out early in their careers is that they literally are the ones who are going to give themselves opportunities by testing things out, by saying yes to things, by not putting their heads down. And this, I mean, if you retain one thing, if you
mm.
forget about me forever, but you remember one thing, is that putting your head down and doing the work is not what's going to put you forward. It is critical, it's important, especially in the early years. But
Yeah.
if at the same time you don't do work around making yourself visible, learning to communicate, learning to work on your triggers so you're not constantly triggered when somebody is saying something to you, learning about just things that interest you. So there's not just one thing that you're focused on. And, I'm pretty sure I can hear people saying, yeah, but I don't have the time.
Mhm.
Yeah.
If you don't have the time now, you're going to have less options later. You're going
Yeah.
to have less opportunities later. And then you have to work and create things from scratch 20 years down the road
Yeah.
versus the other thing I wish I had known earlier is that you can build assets for yourself. All of these are assets. Personal
Mhm.
brand is an asset. Your reputation is an asset. Your businesses are an asset. If you
Yeah.
don't do it early, you're going to have to do it at some point. But it sucks to
Yeah.
do it late,
Yeah.
for lack of a
I
better
mean,
word.
it's
It's
like
never late, BBG. It's never late,
Later,
but it needs
later,
help.
right?
because it's never too early or never too late, right? We're talking about from 20 years ago, or young people, young females versus us, even us. We have our own insecurities. The imposter syndrome pops up sometimes, right? And it's like it's a constant journey, isn't it? Like, there are things that I might be scared of doing right now. And there were things I was scared to do it 5 years ago. But it's a very critical point. As you push yourself a little bit, there's assets you're building, and they become your, war stories and your tool in your toolkit.
And also develops confidence in yourself about the things you look back. How
Yeah.
many times would you have where we discussed and you said, remind yourself all the things that you have done. That's who you are. That's what you need to be putting yourself out to be. You've got something important to share, so share it.
Yeah.
But you don't decide whether it's important or not. Like, put it out there, and maybe it's important for somebody else. I've heard you say that often times. So you said something really cool, which is, you know, you the one that is going to give yourself opportunities. I love that. Can we pull on that thread a little bit more? Tell us a little bit more about what that means.
Yeah. So one of the things I always tell clients that reach out to me is that this expression really probably sound, you were talking about the 80s, but this probably sounds really 80s, but the proof is in the pudding, right? Like, you reached out to me to have this conversation with you, and you reached out on the basis of what you saw that I was putting out. You
Absolutely.
didn't reach out because I sent you my CV. You didn't reach out because I sent an application. You didn't, like, you reached out because Maha and I developed a relationship. We developed it through what she saw of my work that she liked. She took my name into a space where I wasn't. And this created an opportunity to have a conversation where you haven't told people where we are, but we are literally across, I think, 4 continents right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so, how does this happen? Like, I could not have designed this interaction. And it
Mhm.
is made possible by you putting yourself out there with this podcast, and my putting myself out there, and people reaching out and saying, hey, I resonate with what you're saying. Which, by the
Mhm.
way, I'm not saying anything that's like transcendental. You can Google the stuff that I'm saying. But
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
am putting myself out there and saying, these are things that are important for me. And this is what I've learned about how to do this work and how to put myself out there, and it will resonate with people like you.
Yeah.
So that creating opportunities for yourself, that's what it is. If you look at my LinkedIn profile and you go down to my experience section, there is not a single experience in there that doesn't come from this type of interaction,
Mhm.
where I put something out there, or I say to somebody, hey, I'm interested in this, and I sort of, like you said, Maha, pull on that thread and it gives something, and then I pull on another thread and it gives something else, and then eventually it builds a portfolio of assets that are relationships, that are a network, that are companies that I've worked with that signal credibility. And
Mhm.
people don't think about that. But if you go on my LinkedIn right now, there are companies on there that signal credibility. And I thought about that when I said yes to the opportunities of working with them or having them as a client. So I think having two things happening at the same time, putting yourself out there in a way that feels good for you, but also thinking strategically about what is this going to mean in the medium term, or like how do I stack all of this so that
Yeah.
1, 2 years down the road, the message that it's sending is a message that is going to serve me. Let me give you a quick example. every time I give a talk, every single time when I'm done with that talk, I will send the organizer or the client a request to do a LinkedIn review of the talk.
Mm.
It's become a habit.
Yeah.
If you go on my LinkedIn profile right now, there are 27 or something LinkedIn reviews. 3 years ago, there weren't that many reviews. Those
Mm.
reviews are an asset for me now because when somebody reaches out to me and says, "Hey, we're looking for a speaker," or reaches out to someone and says, "Hey, do you know this woman? We're looking for a speaker." This has
Yeah.
happened more than once where I've said, "I would love to work with you. If you want to know more about me, go check out the reviews on my LinkedIn profile."
Yeah.
Right? You stack it, it becomes an asset.
Yeah, it's so great. Like you've actually given quite a lot of nuggets along the way. Because we talked about visibility, and you said, only personal branding is not that, but also there's things you can do to create that. One of the things you said is doing reference, but also, it's stacking them up, making it visible on LinkedIn, which is one. What other things do you think, if somebody were on the path or haven't even started the journey or is only just thinking about, okay, so I'm interested, this is a good conversation, and there's three people talking here with Ginny backing us up, um, and they seem to be from very different backgrounds, very different experiences, and doing different things in for livelihood as well. What would be a few things that you could kind of say, here's some things to start with?
Yeah. So there are two things. I was actually taking notes as you were asking that question. I think there are two things that I have found really impactful. One is harder than the other.
Okay.
Um, One is relationships. So a little
Mm.
bit like what we were talking about, the one with Maha, right? Where you meet people. And LinkedIn is a fantastic place to do that. Fantastic. And this virtual world, people underestimate what it means. Like I have met people in Asia, in Europe, I
Yeah.
have relationships. My BFF, one is in Spain and another is in Texas, of
Yeah.
business friends where we work together and collaborate and send each other clients. So one is building relationships. And the important thing about building relationships is not telling yourself, I don't want to disturb. I have nothing to give. All of that self-talk that we have, it has to stop because that keeps us from having a genuine relationship, which all of us can do. It's just a
Yeah.
conversation. That's it, not a transaction, a
Yeah.
conversation. So that's one piece. The second piece is creating content. I swear to you, if I could just like climb on a mountain and shout to everybody, people, please create content around your expertise,
Yeah.
I would. And the other thing that people are going to hear and the voices are going to come up in their head, I have nothing to say. I'm not an expert. I don't know how to do it. I have to build my personal brand first. I don't want to contribute to the noise. I could go on for hours. None of that matters. You already know something that somebody else will be interested in. You can talk about your path of discovery of all of this. Just documenting that is content. Um, so content and relationships, just those two things are
Yeah.
like putting you on the path of visibility in a way that will compound. And you'll look at 2 years back, you'll look back and you'll say, huh, how did that
Yeah.
happen?
It's really great points. I mean,
Yeah.
like, especially having gone through COVID, right? We are forced to create relationships and conversations in the virtual world. And that virtual world is not going to go anywhere just because
Yeah.
COVID's done, because, we're virtually connected and we're having an awesome conversation. The content creation piece is probably the harder one that you mentioned, right? Because it's pushing yourself out there. But I think doesn't have to be something that you don't know about. And you mentioned this, right? Like you don't have to know something that somebody else doesn't know. That was a fantastic point. You can still build your brand, you can still create content, and somebody else might already be talking about that, but you have your own flavor to it. You have your own way of expression. So there will be an audience for the way you're creating your content and the content of that as well, right?
Yeah, totally. And you don't even need an audience, do you, BBG? You just create it because it's important for you. You
Yeah.
share your journey because it is, and that alone brings a lot of authenticity to the story you're saying. You're not customizing it for anyone for consumption. You're just writing down your own personal experience about, or you're writing a commentary on, or you're providing feedback about an event, and that just becomes your own story. So I have another question. Of course, we all do. Always do. Think about, let's say I am my younger self, yeah, much younger self, and knowing what I know now, then I would have focused on a couple of different things: the ability to, like you said, develop content and build relationships. But I'm really young. I'm just fresh out of school. I've got friends. It's not like I don't have friends. I have a lot of friends. Um, and I want to build a career in one of my professional areas that I've been really interested. I want to get this job in this really great company that I want to be part of. And then I'm like going through this process, and I'm really in self doubt. I don't understand. How do I make myself better, competitively better than many of the other folks that are also looking in there? What are some of the competencies? I'm using competencies deliberately and not skills, because I've built these professional skills through school. What are these competencies that would help me stand out?
Yeah. Um, I think one of the most important, if I think back to what helped me, is the capacity to see the bigger picture. A lot of the time, if you are applying for a job, you're going to try and see. And I just want to caveat this to say that I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. I've had one or two jobs, and I was like, okay, people, I can't do this. Bye. So I have been on the fringes, but I have had interactions even very young. Um, as a, what do you call this, not entrepreneur, what's the word, freelancer.
Mhm.
The capacity to see the bigger picture. So when you go into a company, you think you have to solve for what you're seeing on the job application, or solve for what you think you're being asked directly. But
Mhm.
what you're being asked to do is always part of a bigger picture. I just want to give an example. I came in a really long time ago. I came into a new opportunity, and it was in an admin position. And one of the things I was always fascinated by when I came into a company was the org chart, because it told me about how the organization was structured, so I could understand how they were thinking about their model. So I would always come in, I would find the org chart, I would model it out and try to understand who was who, and where I was, the organization and the department where I was, how did it fit into the bigger picture of the org chart. And I remember having a conversation with one of the project managers at the time, and he was going to tell me about the organization, and he said, what have you seen? And I drew the org chart for him on the paper. And I said, well, I think this is this and this is this. And I remember seeing his face was so surprised.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
then we went on to work together for years. He gave me so many opportunities, and we became such close friends. But I'll
Yeah.
always remember that moment where it was, I had the opportunity, and I didn't think about it. It's in hindsight that I analyzed what happened. The opportunity to get out of the weeds, to just
Mm.
elevate it and say, hey, let's talk about what everybody's trying to accomplish and how I fit into there, right? And it kept me interested, because the weeds wasn't interesting me. I knew I
Yeah.
had to do it, but it kept me interested, and it helped me to have a conversation that
Mhm.
someone who was already where I wanted to go also found interesting. So I think that's
That's
something that
so
I'd love people to think about.
Yeah, that's so, like, as a young person, for you to kind of have that high level vision sort of picture in your head is so great, right? Because me being in a leadership role, it's taken me a long time to kind of get to a position to kind of step back and then go, okay, well, where do I fit in? I kind of am like you as well. I do have that as my nature, but as leaders, Maha, if there are young people, or if there are even, doesn't need to be young, but depending on what their personalities are, it always helps to show this is what you're doing and this is where it fits to the overall goal of that organization, of that business unit, whatever it is, because then you're all almost like creating a purpose, you know on a daily basis,
Yeah.
right? That is so powerful. So if an individual has that capability, great. If not, as leaders, I think we have a role to play.
In developing, helping develop that.
Yeah.
I'm being in sales, both of us, BBG, will tell you that one of the number one things that we ask our teams to do is say, do you have the org chart of the organization that you're speaking with? Because then
Mm,
you can apply yourself differently. You can speak to them because it motivates them, and it helps them listen to. Can you speak their same language? Because someone is in finance versus someone
Yeah.
is in business, in the business applications. Like, you can speak to them in their own language if you knew exactly where they fit in the overall organization. We ask this all the time, so it's amazing that you mentioned that, because it goes beyond sales or marketing to be doing that. It
correct.
you can fit, it can be applicable in any role that you're going for.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. It's like for your own motivation, creating your own purpose, but also talking to the audience. Like, the person that we're talking to,
yeah.
you're actually showing him this is what I know, but it actually hit a chord with him because it's like, wow, she's actually talking about the organization I run,
Yeah.
and she's on point. And so when we go and talk to our prospects or customers, it's like we understand your business. So there's like so many different levels of value you can add by just taking a step back and looking at the big picture. This is so great.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think there's a piece of it that's also about trusting oneself.
Mm,
Maha, you were asking, what would I have wanted to know? A lot of the times we feel like somebody else is going to give us answers, or somebody else is going to tell us when we're ready. And I think that developing the curiosity and the self trust early on
yeah.
is going to be so critical to you walking a path that feels good for you. And at the end of the day, that's the only thing that counts. We think there are so many other things that count. The only way for it to work is if it feels good and aligned to you. And you can only do that if you learn how to trust yourself. And it's not like a process that you do like this, but if it's something that you are constantly thinking about, it's something that you can do. It's just like going to the gym. If you
Yeah.
do the reps, you're going to get the result. So that
Yeah.
whole working on building your self trust and your self belief, it works and it compounds over time.
Yeah, indeed,
Yeah.
indeed, indeed. Wow,
Super
this is. I mean, like I said, I keep saying, like, I wish I had met you, the BBG of today, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I was just starting my career and I'd met you, man. You know what? In 20 years, I'd be, I don't know, I'd be somewhere else. We
That's
won't
the thing,
even.
right? I think, growing up, I didn't have very many role models in engineering to look up to. Not just female, but even male as well, coming from the culture I am from. But now we've got the opportunity to be those, and that's why this conversation is so important. And I hope the audience sees that. And by audience, Maha, we talked about, young people, young females trying to look into careers that are maybe non-traditional, but also um, people who are mid career, but they're looking at what else can I do. Maybe they're non-technical people, but they're like, is there space for me to go into tech sales or take pre-sales or marketing or PR? And there absolutely is. And you can actually start building those assets to get you there. Have a vision, start talking to people, start having conversations,
Build
and
those
be a yes.
relationships.
Yeah, and be a yes when somebody reaches out to you and say, hey, create your brand out there, create who you are so people know. Like, like how we looked up for BBG, and we were like, we want to speak with you. And she's like, yeah. So there's so many lessons to learn just in that interaction as well, right?
Mm.
Yeah.
Well,
Awesome.
we could just keep
Last
talking.
thoughts,
Not
BBG?
even.
Any thoughts before we, conclude our conversation?
I didn't hear what you asked me.
Oh, sorry. Was there anything else that you wanted to share? Any last thoughts you wanted to share with us or the audience before we conclude this awesome conversation?
I think the capacity to have, I'm very interested in this concept right now, the concept of cognitive dissonance. So the capacity to live two things at the same time, the fear or the discomfort at something and thinking I'm not going to be able to do it and all of that, and the knowledge that you can, and the doing of the thing in the small steps. And it's that sentence of feel the fear and do it anyway, but we never talk about what that actually means.
Mhm.
Behind that sentence is cognitive dissonance. And the problem with cognitive dissonance is it feels so uncomfortable in our bodies that we're just like, oh, forget this. And we go and decide not to do it. But learning how to live with that, the discomfort and the doing, I think is the key to everything. It really, really is. So if people can start practicing that, I think it'll make a huge difference in their lives.
And then if you start early, start young.
You know, you'll just have that little voice that says, no, I don't want to do it. And it'll kick and scream. And you're like, I hear you. You'll be fine. We're fine. We're on this path. When you relax, you can come and join us. That whole splitting in two, if you start, I mean, if I had started at 20, oh my God.
Yeah.
Right? We don't want to hear, another woman or man or anyone say that, like, if I know what I know now, I'd be in a different place today. Like, how
Yeah.
many times have we heard in this conversation each of us say that over and over again? Is the opportunity to know what could work, the art of the possible.
Yeah.
And for that, it's not just necessary to, I know Barsha mentioned that, and then you repeated it, which is, don't stick your head down, put your head down and just focus on developing a skill and knowledge base. But also, how are you going to take that and share that more broadly? I mean, that's what we heard you say.
Yeah.
I mean, among a whole lot of other wonderful things as well.
Great conversations, everyone. Thank you, Bibiji, for your time.
You
Maha, we'll do it all over again next time.
Yes. Thank you, BBG, from the
Thank you.
bottom of my heart.
Thank you, Maha.